All right, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Brescher here. Today's lesson is going to focus on dividing rational numbers, part 1. Our objective is that we'll all be able to accurately divide with rational numbers, and this lesson specifically will focus on integers and positive and negative decimals. Moving on. First, we want to develop an understanding of fact families to help make a connection between multiplication and division of integers. So I'm going to take you back in time. We're going all the way back to second grade when we learned that 3 groups of 2 make 6, or 3 times 2 equals 6. Remember that whenever we started learning division, we learned that the product divided by one of the factors will actually give us the other factor as our quotient. So with division, we could say 6 divided by 3 is equal to 2. Or vice versa, we could take the product divided by the second factor and we get the first factor. Well, this just tells us that when you take a positive divided by a positive, you get another positive. Now, if you haven't checked out my video on multiplying rational numbers yet, you might want to refer to that, because this next step kind of involves some of that understanding. 3 times negative 3 is equal to negative 9 was something that we spoke about in that video. When we understand this, that 3 groups of negative 3, or you could use repeated addition to say negative 3 plus negative 3 plus negative 3 equals negative 9, we can use the same idea that the product divided by a factor is going to give us the other factor. And this tells us that a negative divided by a positive gives us the other factor, which is a negative. And of course, we could take the product divided by the second factor, negative 3, and we get the first factor of positive 3 as our quotient. So a negative divided by a negative equals a positive. Now, the only thing we're missing here is what happens whenever we switch and the positive comes first and then we divide by a negative. Well, we don't have a commutative property of division. You can't just change the order without changing the value. So we're going to have to refer to another multiplication problem. A negative times a negative equals a positive. Since we know this, then we can also say that the product 9 divided by one of the factors, a negative, is going to equal the other factor, which is a negative. So a positive divided by a negative does equal a negative. Moving on. First, we want to do a little bit of practice with dividing positive decimals, and then we'll kind of tie it all together to understand how to divide with negative decimals. In my first problem, we have 3 4/10 divided by 1 2/10. Our divisor, 1 2/10, we want that to be a whole number. So we're going to move the decimal 1 place to the right. Essentially, we're just multiplying this number by 10. And whatever we do to this number, we must do to the dividend as well. Now we can rewrite the problem as 34 divided by 12. Our decimal goes straight up in our answer, and we divide. 12 goes into 34 2 times, which is 24. Subtract, you have 10. Bring the 0 down. 12 goes into 100. 8 times, which is 96. Subtract, we have 4. We're going to bring that 0 down again. 12 goes into 40 3 times, which is 36. Oh my, I'm going to get 4 again. And I already recognize there's going to be a pattern. I'm going to keep getting 4 and bringing a 0 down, which tells me that this is a repeating decimal. So we draw a little line above the 3 to show that it's 2.833333, and that goes on forever. Let's look at our other example. 75 hundredths divided by 5 tenths. Again, we want our divisor, 5 tenths, to be equal to a whole number. So we're going to move our decimal 1 place to the right. And we do the same thing on our dividend. Again, It doesn't matter where the decimal is on the dividend. The only number that we're concerned with in making it a whole number is our divisor. The decimal will go straight up in your answer, so it's going to be right here in my quotient. Now let's divide. 5 goes into 7 once, which is 5. Subtract, you have 2. Bring the next number down. 5 goes into 25 5 times, which is 25. Subtract, we have 0, and we have a terminating decimal. Put your decimal in, and our quotient is 1 5/10. Now let's kind of tie it together by applying the rules for dividing with negatives. If we had a positive 3 4/10 divided by negative 1 2/10, now a positive divided by a negative equals a negative. So my answer is still going to be the same quotient, except for it'll be a negative 2.83 repeating. For our second example, we have a negative 75 hundredths divided by negative 5/10. A negative divided by negative equals, there you go, a positive. So our answer is actually going to be exactly the same, 1 5/10. Now it's your turn. You get an opportunity to practice. So I want you to take out a sheet of loose leaf paper and a pencil, write down these problems, and solve them. And then play the video to see how you did. We'll go over some of the basic parts and the answer, of course. Okay, let's see how you did. Our first problem, 4/10 divided by 75 hundredths. Did you remember to move the decimal 2 places to the right? And what you do to the divisor, you must do to the dividend. Add that 0 in. Now when we rewrite them as whole numbers, we have 40 divided by negative 75. A positive divided by a negative gives you a negative quotient. Your answer is negative 0.53 repeating. Notice the line is just drawn above the 3 because that's the only number that repeats. Let's look at the next one. You should have put negative 12 15 hundredths in the box. And negative 4 2/10 is your divisor. That's what you're dividing by. Then we move the decimal 1 place to the right to make the divisor a whole number, and what you do there, you must do to the dividend. Our answer is 2.91, and the 6 is repeating. Notice the line above the 6 tells us that that digit will repeat, and only that digit. Moving on to the next one. First of all, once again, the 6.25, 6 25 hundredths is your divisor, so we need to make that into a whole number. And do the same thing to our dividend. Now we're ready to write them. A negative divided by a positive gives us a negative quotient, and your answer is a terminating decimal of negative 7,768 10 thousandths. Well, I hope this helped you out. See ya.